Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. And I'll go through quickly our agenda for tonight. So for today, we're going to be talking about financial aid. Ginny Hazen and Paul Sunday from Admissions and Financial Aid will be doing that segment. And then Ann Root Keith, who just appeared from Advancement, she'll be walking us through the impact of philanthropy on the operating budget. And then Inga is going to be talking about the Dean of the College Division and student services in particular, and what the budget activities and priority setting is that happens there. Next week, just a heads up about next week, which is our last session, sadly. We have two segments for next week. Matt Slaughter, who is the incoming dean of the Tuck School, will be talking for the first 45 minutes to an hour on sort of macroeconomic influences on higher education. So if you have ever heard Matt talk about macroeconomic issues, it promises to be a very good session and certainly very applicable to what we've been talking about. And then the second piece is we have a case study that we're going to be emailing out to all of you probably over the weekend. We need to get through one more review tomorrow, which we're calling the $200 million case study. And what it is, and I don't want to get too far out in front of it, but it's effectively, if you had $200 million, it gives you a few options as to what you might choose to do with that $200 million and asks you to apply both your own thinking and what we've talked about during the course to that $200 million and just have ideas about that. And then President Hanlon will be joining us next week. Matt will be staying for that discussion to sort of lead a discussion among all of us about what would you do with $200 million? And then we'll all go for it. We'll try to get that $200 million. Yes, Lisa?
We're meeting on Wednesday next week, is that right?
Thank you, that's right. It is Wednesday of next week, not Thursday. But Rohale, it's in this same room, is that right? It is. It's in this same room, but it is on Wednesday. Thank you for that reminder. So that's the next two tonight and next week. Just, we will at some point send out a survey, but anytime you want to send us any suggestions about the course, especially while it's fresh in your mind, doesn't have to be just on these topics, but any topics, we sincerely want to continue improving the course. So if you have any ideas, thoughts, shoot an email to Rohale, to Jen, to Rick, to me. It can be just bullet points, as detailed as you want, but at some point we'll send out a survey. But while it's fresh in your mind, if you have any thoughts you want to convey to us on any of these ideas, please do that. We really appreciate it. It helped a lot to get the feedback last year about what was good and bad about the course. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Paul and to Ginny. And we're going to try to keep you to around 40 minutes, so I'll be the time guy and give you a little heads up about time.
Sounds good.
Thank you very much.
All right, can folks hear me okay? Great, okay, you can start now. So good evening, I'm Paul Sunday, I'm the Director of Admission, and I'm joined here this evening by Ginny Hazen, our Director of Financial Aid. And we're going to be talking to you about financial aid. Specifically, talk a little bit about the philosophy, kind of the priority of financial aid. We're going to talk some about the growth and expenditures, and actually that's where we're going to spend most of our time is talking about the number, what's happening with that number, is that number sustainable? And we'll end on a note about affordability. You know, Dartmouth is making an enormous investment. Is Dartmouth affordable? I think it's a fair question. And then we should have plenty of time for questions. Does that seem like a fair game? Okay. So why do we care about financial aid? And before we go any further, I want a little promo here. We have these lovely bags, and this slide is blank for a reason. And we're going to put two and two together. So if you give me an answer, I'll give you a bag. I've got a few of these. So why do we care about financial aid? It's a real question.
Sorry, I'm
You're sounding out.
I'm just from residential education, by the way.
Oh, is that what we do with questions? When you answer it, you say who you are? That's terrific.
Yes, ideally.
We'll give you a chance first because you raised your hand.
So my name is Bill Martin, I teach at Tuck, and I think it's important because it provides access to those who might not otherwise be able to access it.
Provides access. Great, that's terrific. Okay, go ahead. Thank you. Thank you for your answer. You can clap for it. All right.
I just want to say this is why the financial aid budget is always on. It's like give away bags at the drop of a hat.
Actually, I'll tell you where these bags come from. We do a summer program for historically underrepresented students. It's called the Dartmouth Bound program, and it's funded by our alums. And we give these out to the students who arrive. And when I first saw it, I thought, really, this thing? But they love them. They love them. And they have a nice little thing here for your personal device, your earbuds and all that. So the kids, they get them when they get to campus and they wear them the whole time they're here. But anyway, you had a question, so go for it, or an answer.
An answer, yes. I think that it's morally sound.
You're morally sound. So that's similar. That works.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't mind passing my bag to someone else.
Well, you choose carefully.
I'm going to split it up amongst the people that really need it.
Fair enough. Other answers? Other answers? I've got one more bag. Go for it.
It does provide a means for students who wouldn't otherwise couldn't consider college to a certain degree, like at all, but also to consider colleges of Dartmouth's tier, to be able to consider it. So not just students who wouldn't have access to Dartmouth's education, but wouldn't have access to kind of the thought of, I should apply to schools.
Right.
Because the cost of the application can be prohibitive if you're not looking for long-term rewards, and if schools provide a large amount of financial aid, then that cost of applying to a school might seem a lot less, and so students might apply to more schools and become more active in the college application process. And some students who may not have gone to college otherwise may be more incentivized to do so if schools like Dartmouth provide financial aid to the extent they do.
I think that's a great point, and you're putting it in a national context, which I think is important. So why is it important for these students to do that?
They bring a diverse perspective to all campuses, and
Okay.
if any portion of society is significantly not homogeneous but does not represent certain large portions, like large as the rest portions of society, it can lose perspective and not be as representative as it could have been. So, for example, with high school and college, I think the statistics 1/3 of our students nationally drop out before the end of high school, and then 2/3 do not manage to get a 4-year degree. So that's like each of those is chopping up a chunk, like a large third of our population, which is no longer represented in jobs which require certain levels of education. And so it might not provide perspective from historically, like you've mentioned, underrepresented or socioeconomically repressed communities.
Sure. No, I think those are great points. Definitely worth a bag. Definitely worth a bag. Thank you. So in the interest of time and the fact that I'm out of bags, let's move on. But I think that's a great point, and I think all of your points dovetail with where we're coming from. This point about equality of access, that smart students should be able to go to places like this, regardless of their ability to pay. That's a basic tenet that's been held firm by Dartmouth for years. It underlies this commitment to a need-blind admissions process, which means in the admissions process, we're not thinking at all about whether or not students can afford to attend, and then a full funding financial aid policy. So once we admit a student, we're committed to making this place accessible. But we also think about it in that national context, which is what you were speaking about. That education is an engine for social mobility. It certainly should be, and we certainly work to make it so. And that's important for the individuals, it's important for the institutions, but it's important for the country as a whole. It's part of what makes America, America. And so this notion of social mobility, but also socioeconomic diversity, and this was touched on a little bit as well in the comments, is it's good for the learning environment. What is Dartmouth trying to do? You know, we're here. Oh, did you have something you want to say about that?
No, sorry.
Oh, no, that's great.
Stretching my hand.
Okay. No, that's great.
Thank you.
What are we trying to do? We're trying to educate. We're trying to prepare the next generation of leaders. We want to prepare students for lives of leadership and impact. We want to do it in the best possible way. And research is pretty consistent about this, that a diverse student population enriches the learning environment. It produces better outcomes. And so we think about it on a kind of a personal context, a national context, but an institutional context as well. We make Dartmouth a better place. We make this a better education. So those are important philosophical tenets about why we care about financial aid. But we also care because it's a big number. And it is a sizable chunk of the budget. So here's a chance to, if people have the clickers? Great. So let's go for it. The question here is, in fiscal 2014, how much money did Dartmouth spend on scholarships? So I think I click once. Is that right? Yep, there we go. No hurry. Okay. Did it seem like those last couple seconds were longer than the other
The
ones?
last
Okay.
one really is.
I think I click again here. Okay. So now it went away. So should I click one more time? I don't want to get ahead of this. Well, we'll try.
Go.
Ah, there we go. Great. So nobody went low, and that's really, I'm not sure what to make of that, but that's fascinating. Great. I'm going to turn it over to Ginny for a few minutes.
So the correct answer is $78 million. And think about it, that's a big number even for an institution like Dartmouth. And just to put it in perspective, it makes up a huge chunk of the college's budget. And I think what you have to think about is how big a chunk can it make up? Because what's being spent for scholarships can't be devoted to the other portions of the college's mission. So we'll be talking more about that as we go through. So, Paul, do you want to do these quick so I don't
okay.
blow it?
So-
Why is financial aid a
Yeah,
big
sure.
and growing number?
Yeah.
And now you guys
Did we click too many times? Why don't we
No.
go back once?
No.
Let's see. I thought I saw that box. Well,
No.
oh, let's see. Oh, do we break it?
There you go.
All right. I'll try it one more time. I'll try it once more. All right.
There you
Well, hey, that's great. So whoever managed to get one in, super. So everybody said all of the above, right? And you were right. So I'm going to talk first about this, right?
Yes.
Okay. So all of the above, absolutely. I'm going to talk about the admissions part of this, and then Ginny will talk about the financial aid part about this. And so we're about numbers of students. So more students are receiving aid. So this lays out 100% is the entering class. 42.8 in class of 1999 were receiving scholarships from Dartmouth, and the rest were not. So you can see for the class of 1999, about 43% of students who were entering Dartmouth were receiving scholarship aid at that time. If you forward ahead to the class of 2018, 46%. So as a proportion of the entering class, we have more students who are receiving scholarship from Dartmouth, so more students on aid. In addition to that, the first year class has been getting larger. Now, class of 2018 was a little larger than we planned, but even if it hadn't been, I think you can see that trend line. Generally speaking, it's been inching up. So more students overall, a higher proportion of students receiving aid. So just A alone is having real impact. Go ahead.
In a need blind system, I would expect those lines to be jumping back and forth from 60 to 80 to 10. How is it that they're so consistent?
I think that's a great question. They do jump around some in all of this. Who we're admitting, who we're yielding, there's a lot between application, then the admission, and then enrollment decisions that are affecting what shows up at any given year. I think that the answer to your question lies as much in how we're recruiting and how we're getting students into the pool as it is about how we're funding them and who's ultimately choosing to enroll. So they do move around some, but you're absolutely right. They don't swing by large moves. And you're speaking to a specific interest of ours, which Jenny will talk about some, which is how we get this number up. But
And
oh yeah, go
I
ahead.
can assure you that the Financial Aid Office does not look at the financial aid application until after the student's been admitted. We don't have time.
Yeah, well, and yeah, so you have no idea. But this part A alone is
$3.6 million.
$3.6 million.
It's an additional 81 students getting scholarship in the class of 18 compared to 99.
Yeah. So just this move alone has had real impact on the budget, is the point there. And I think you're going to take the rest of these?
Yes.
Great.
So not only is the number growing because of more students, but we also have rising costs, little to no growth in family incomes, and we have more low-income students. So this graph is in nominal dollars, and the blue part shows the average scholarship by class over the last 20 years. The red part is the family contribution, and it's also known as net price, and it's simply the difference between the cost of attendance and the average scholarship. Now, I know you've talked a little bit about cost of attendance in the other previous sessions. My definition is a bit different here because this is what we use as the student budget. So not only does it include tuition, room, board, and fees, it also includes books and miscellaneous expenses. So you can see the costs have grown from $27,145 to $62,337. At the same time, the family's ability to contribute towards the cost of education has not kept pace. In the class of 1999, they were able to cover 46% of the cost. In the class of 2018, they're only able to cover 29% of the cost. Now, part of that is the flat incomes, but it's also because we're admitting more lower income students who, by the very definition, can't contribute as much as their middle or upper middle income counterparts could. This next slide takes it into inflation-adjusted dollars. And as you can see, if you do the math quickly, costs have grown by about 50%, but the average scholarship has almost doubled in that time. What's interesting to note, though, is the net price, and it shouldn't be surprising because we said the growth was pretty flat, has actually dropped by $1,500. That's in real dollars over that same time period. And we'll talk about in a little bit some of the other reasons. But again, remember, we've got more lower income students that is dropping that average, and nationally, the family incomes remain flat during that time period.
Ginny, are these two slides, is the net number just for students that are on aid, or is it for all of the entering class?
Just scholarship recipients. Because what it is here is just simply the difference between the cost and that average scholarship.
So it's that 40, whatever that slide is, the 46%?
Yes, yes.
And the other 54% are paying the full $600.
That's right. So is this growth in the scholarship budget sustainable? I'll have to do it.
Okay. Well, should we see? Go ahead, give it one more click. Let's see what happens.
Here it goes.
Okay. All right, great.
Uh-oh. I've done it twice. Do I do it again?
I would just click.
Yeah, I've clicked quite a lot of times. Oh.
There we
it goes.
go.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, so this next slide, there's not a right or wrong answer here. Oh, maybe yes is wrong, all things considered.
It depends on when
Yes.
you're asking that
So,
question.
If you look at the compound annual growth rate for the scholarship budget over the last 20 years, it's grown by 6.8%. And tuition revenue has only grown by 4.7%. So if you look at the last 20 years, you'd have to give a resounding no as an answer. But if you look at the past 5 years, and you can't just look at the numbers up there because it's more than, it's not, I don't have a 5-year number up there. You'll see that the scholarship budget has grown by 2.7% and tuition has gone up by 4.8%. So you might say maybe if you based it on the last 5 years. However, I think we need to be very cautious even with our maybe, because look at how the growth rate has varied over periods of time. And let's just talk about some of the reasons. From fiscal 95 to 2001, the country was experiencing economic expansion, and so not surprisingly, the growth in the scholarship budget was modest. But look what happened from 2001 to 2010. The growth rate exploded. So what was happening during that time period? Well, there were 2 recessions, the first one in 2001, the second one began in 2008, and I don't know when it ended or if it's ended. And the college introduced some financial aid initiatives. They were aimed at making Dartmouth more accessible and affordable to lower income students, but they were also meant to keep our financial aid packages competitive with those of our peers. So what did we do during that time? First of all, we introduced free tuition for students from families with incomes under $75,000 who had typical assets. We eliminated loans from the packages of all students. We went need blind for all students, including international students. We had not been need blind for international students before then. And we forgave one summer or leave term earnings expectation for students during their 4 years so that they could take advantage of unpaid internships or research opportunities. However, as much as we like financial aid initiatives, and it's a lot of fun to say yes to people, it was really clear by 2010 that we couldn't sustain that growth rate and that we needed to do something to flatten the curve. So we had to retrench on 2 of our initiatives. We reintroduced loans into the packages starting with the class of 2015, and we reintroduced them at a much higher level than we had them in packages before. The class of 2011, which was the last class to have loans, their maximum loan was $3,175. Our maximum loan now is $5,500, so you can see we really put in good-sized loans. We also abandoned our waiver for the one free leave term or summer earnings expectation. However, we haven't simply cut since that time. We were able to expand our free tuition initiative to students from families with incomes between $75,000 and $100,000, and we began packaging them again without loans. So we were able to improve our financial aid packages that way. But I think what's really important to know is over this entire period of time, we have kept our commitment to socioeconomic diversity and to focusing particularly on access for low-income students and first-generation students. So I think, Paul,
Is it my turn again?
Your turn.
Okay. So how do we kind of maintain the sustainability? Whatever this curve looks like, I've got a pretty good guess that generally speaking it's going to be upwards. So how do we have this sustainable financial aid budget? How do we fund that? And sustainability really does depend on philanthropy, and I'll explain this chart. This again is one of these 100% charts. So if we take the entire scholarship budget, what are the contributors to that budget? And so down here you have the federal government, then you have restricted funds. Those are funds that are donated to the college strictly for financial aid. And then the red here is unrestricted funds. And so if we think about what's competing with Dartmouth's operating budget, it's the red here. And so we can see a couple of things. One, the federal government is becoming a smaller and smaller supplier. As many of you may know, the federal government has consistently been moving its support for students in college from grant programs to loan programs. And so the result, one example of the result is right here. So it's dropping as an influencer of our financial aid scholarship budget. Another point that you can see here is that generally speaking, we're in a positive trajectory with the restricted funds for financial aid through philanthropic giving. And we were moving along very, very well until the recession of which Ginny spoke in 08, 09. So things got up into the better than 50% range, but they've fallen back down to just over 41% now. And you can see the commensurate impact on the operating budget or the funds that are competing with the rest of the operating budget. So we overall like where this number is going. I think we'd like to see more in the green. So I'm glad you're here, Anne. More in the green than in the red. Yes, exactly. So philanthropy is a big part of the story. It's been a big part of the story, and I think it will continue to be a big part of the story going forward. So what does this mean for families? Is Dartmouth affordable? And how does that look? And this is really kind of our last didactic slide here. And I could explain this one for you. These might be a little small, But each of these brackets, these are income brackets. And all the way on the left here, we have folks who applied for financial aid whose family income is less than $100,000. That's the first one. The second one is $100,000 to $150,000 in annual family income. The third one over is $150,000 to $200,000 in family income. The fourth one is greater than $200,000 in family income and qualifying for aid. And that final one is folks who are not qualifying for aid. And what you can see with the blue is the net price goes up. That's logically what you would expect. And you see with the green is that the average grant for that bracket goes down. And that's logical. I mean, if it's a need-based program built on full funding, making Dartmouth accessible in financial terms and strictly in financial terms, one would expect to see a curve like this. But one of the things that we've looked at is net price as a percentage of income. And as Ginny has talked about, this commitment to enrolling more low-income students and doing a better job of supporting our low-income students or lower-income students, things have improved. If this were a chronological graph, we would see improvement. This is a snapshot for the class of 2018. It's kind of our latest moment in time that we can grab. And for the below 100,000 portion, and we have a net price of $6,700, which is about 13% of a family's income. So it's pretty low. For the 100 to 150 group, it's 21%. 150 to 200, it's 20%. Over 200 for the group that we know about that's qualifying for scholarship aid, it's 17%. And then for the no-need students or families that we know of, it's 16%. Of course, as you pointed out earlier, Mike, there's a whole portion of this that we just don't know about because they haven't applied for aid, so we're not aware. But so what is affordable? Is it 13? Is it 21? Is it 16? That's a real conversation for Dartmouth right now, and it's a conversation for many schools when we talk about accessibility and affordability. And I think we're constantly in a conversation about how are we doing on this front? Are we maintaining Dartmouth's accessibility at all income levels? And are there things that we can do better? So for us, that's a pretty consistent conversation.
Speaking to the low end there, before I came here, I was at a satellite campus of the University of Texas. The annual tuition was about $6,000. And I would say probably 80% of those students could not afford that without financial aid.
Right.
So yes, there's a whole huge batch that's way over here.
That's right. That's right. And for our low income portion, $6,700. That's an enormous sum. And we can think about a campus job. We can think about summer earnings. But even in these circumstances, you know this better than me. One of my anecdotal senses is that when we get into a real low income, the parent contribution, whatever we might assign, may or may not be paid by the parents. It may be paid by the student. So, I mean, we're thinking about that issue. I'm not sure if there's something you want to add.
I do. You were actually my plant in the audience, because the one thing that I have said for the entire time I've been director here is that the leave term or the summer earnings expectation is way too high. We're asking these students that come from families that might be welfare families, and that's all the income they've got, and the student contributes to that family, you know, in order to support them. We're asking them to contribute over $5,000 between what they have to earn during the summer, where they can't even get a job, and what we're asking them to make here, which they want to send home. So I don't think I won this battle before I retire as director, but it's been my battle
Still
since
got a
day
couple
one.
months.
That's right.
Yes.
Is all of the aid that Dartmouth gives, as opposed to loans, based on need, as opposed to some schools give scholarships for good scholars that they want to recruit?
It's based solely on need.
And the graph that you had before with the red bar and the
Blue?
I think it was blue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That one?
Nope.
Nope,
Okay,
back the one that I did.
The mountain one.
This one?
No, keep going, keep going. Right
This one. Yes.
So do you want inflation adjusted or nominal?
That's not as important to me as where does loan funding fit into this?
It's part of the family contribution, so it's any part of the
it's in the-
cost of education not covered by grant aid. We're using the federal definition of net price there. And if you think about it, the family has got to either earn it or borrow it. So
Right.
it's their contribution.
So it's in the red, not the blue.
Correct.
Yeah. Yes.
And how does Dartmouth and other schools, get the word out about need, that it's a need blind? Because, it's the point that people made at the beginning about increasing accessibility. If people don't understand that it's even possible.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point, Lori. And I think that schools like ours haven't really known how to talk about this in an accessible way. I would say it's really within the last 5 years, maybe a little bit more than 5 years, that we've been pushing this message. And it was something that we talked about. So the free tuition initiative that Ginny talked about, and we push that out pretty energetically because we think that's something that people can get their minds around. Okay, if I make less than $100,000, or if my family makes less than $100,000, Dartmouth will be tuition free. So we thought about how do we simplify our language, how do we be more direct with people, and even communication vehicles that we've been using. So we're doing much more work with community-based organizations now, for example. So if we take a setting where the secondary schools may not have strong counseling departments or very high student to counselor ratios, they can be 400 or even more. And in some communities, their secondary school budgets are such that they've decided college counseling is a line item that is not core, so they're gone. So what we've been seeing is that organizations outside of the secondary schools have been percolating up to fill in that gap. And how do we partner with them? So QuestBridge is an example of that. That's a national organization. Prep for Prep in New York City is another one. The Schuler Scholars in Chicago. I mean, there are so many of these. And in the admissions office, we're thinking about community-based organizations in a similar way to the way we've thought about high schools traditionally. What are the channels through which we can reach students? And it's a never-ending process for us to figure out how do we do a better job of communicating and reaching out to these students. Yes?
In terms of the top quality students that we want to have here, do you feel like your recruiting efforts reach, 60%, 80% of the potential top candidates that are out there?
I'd like to think that our recruitment efforts do. The specific population that we're talking about has been studied, and Carolyn Hawksby and some colleagues came up with a number, and they said there are 26,000 students in this country who have the academic credentials to be admitted to and be successful at our top schools. Do we have 26,000 of those applicants? I don't think so. I don't think any of us do. But she kind of put a number on it for the first time of who's out there and who could possibly do this. And since they came up with that research and that finding, schools have been trying to, and she's been involved in that, and others have been involved in that, developing interventions to encourage these students to get into our pools. And Dartmouth has participated in some of those interventions. So for example, and the College Board has participated in that. And so for example, one of the programs that Dartmouth participated in was a program where students were identified to essentially be in that 26,000 group, and they were sent packets with fee waivers and said, so this coupon will get you a free fee waiver to all of these schools. Go ahead and apply. And that was one thing that they've studied, and they're going, okay, how productive is that? Is that a good method? Should we try something else? Other programs have included placing additional counselors into schools, mentors, essentially quasi-peer mentors, folks who are a little bit older who will go to students directly and say, you can do this, and I will help you do that. That's another kind of intervention. And so I think we're in this ferment right now where the problem has been identified, the opportunity has been identified, and now organizations and schools are trying to find different ways to move that needle.
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure that that's really where it starts. I've worked for Princeton Review for a number of years. And what I found was that a lot of students, by the time they were sophomores in high school, they or their parents had already made up their mind the kind of school they were going to go to. Even students who should have been applying to Princeton, Dartmouth, were applying to some state school.
Right, that's right.
Because I really think it was ignorance on the parents' part and the lack of better guidance at the schools for the reasons you already talked about.
Right.
So I'm wondering, have you ever thought about moving your recruiting effort so that it covers those lower terms?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's a great point. And one of the things that I think you're pointing up is that this challenge is so large, it can be accessed from multiple places and multiple directions. And one of the questions for us is, in our role, where can we best apply our resources? And to your point about middle school, that's something that we've been talking about and actually been doing some programs with middle schools and middle school parents to say, think now, because the choices that your child makes in 7th and 8th grade are going to determine that student's opportunities in 9th grade, which are critical for 12th grade. This has been a big conversation among our peer group as well, and one of the things that we've talked about is the current application system is really based on a transaction. That when a student reaches their senior year of high school, they start to work with us through this common application. Does that really make sense? Maybe we need a system that starts years earlier, that is saying to those middle school students, here's what you need now. And that's something that schools are working on, is how do we virtually reach out? So in addition to the kind of partnerships I'm talking about, is there something larger scale, national, that we can do? And that's very exciting. That's very exciting.
Yeah, I think the low income ones, you need to target the students and the teachers, and the middle income people, you need to target the parents.
Yeah. I think you always need to target the parents too then. Now you are raising your hand though.
I am, but
Okay.
yeah, do I have time for
Yes,
more
please do.
questions? Yeah. Just going back to the student loan question, it sounds to me like your ultimate goal would be for every student to graduate without any debt. Is that true? Or I guess I have always thought of student debt as not necessarily a bad thing if it's low enough, but is your thinking on that different?
No, I think that's a great point. You're right on it.
Okay, our goal was never to have them graduate with no loans. Our goal, what we were seeing before we did the no loan initiatives, was that our lowest income students were graduating with the highest level of indebtedness because they don't have the summer earnings expectation. They may struggle here academically, so they don't feel they can work as many hours as other students. They have to borrow to cover the computer. They have to borrow to cover half the cost of the health insurance. So they had those loans. We knew they were going to need to take them before we even started packaging a loan. So our initial goal, that's what it really was initially, was to not do away with the loans, but to lessen what they were borrowing. And we've been, I can't look just at the low-income students as I say this, but we've been relatively successful, except until we hit the 2008 recession, and then parents decided that students were going to borrow the maximum amount that they could. And it was a good decision, and leave the parents' assets intact. Hopefully, they would come back, and the family would be better off by doing that. But the average loan, so we went from having the loans in the packages and with an average loan of about $16,000 to the class of 14 graduate. These were scholarship recipients who borrowed at some point, graduated with an average loan of $15,000. So you can see, the class of 14 was a no loan class for us, so they were still borrowing. But I think the overall situation in the country is what was really driving it.
So Ginny, can you just talk briefly about the national situation on that? I've seen your sort of peer group slide of our graduates with their average debt, and it's in the range of a lot of the peers. They're all, students at all our peers are graduating in that same ballpark. But when the national press talks about the crisis of student debt, where are they talking about? Where is that happening?
A lot of it is the for-profits and institutions that simply can't meet full needs. So what they're doing is, if you don't meet full need, you do something that's called gapping. And so you say, yes, you can come to Dartmouth, but this is all I can give you. And if you want to come, you'll have to find a way of making up the difference. Their way of making up the difference is borrowing. And so it's those two things that families get into situations where, I mean, I know admissions doesn't like me to have these conversations, but I have them anyway, where, you know, there are families who Dartmouth is the wrong financial decision for them. They have made bad choices in the past. I can't make up their I can't turn those choices around and make them be the right choices. So they may have borrowed to the point where normally no one can find, except the wealthy. You're looking at, you don't pay for it from current income. You're looking at current income, past savings, and borrowing if you haven't saved sufficiently. Well, if you've already used up your capacity to borrow, Dartmouth is not the right decision for you. You know, because if you don't have the assets and your income isn't sufficient to pay, borrowing's the only answer.
So I think we had one more question, and I saw your hand up if you want to go ahead.
I've seen a lot in the news about Cooper Union, and I think it's really exciting and sort of interesting what's going on there. And I was just wondering what your take on that situation is, and sort of big picture for people in your field,
What specifically about Cooper Union?
that they were tuition free for a really long time, like 100 years or something, because of Peter Cooper's money. And then they built all these buildings in New York and had to start charging tuition. And someone who's actually here before was the president of Cooper Union, but recently was kicked out because of the tuition stuff. And I guess
Jamshed Baruch.
yeah, and that all seems really interesting to me. But as far as like from your perspective, how is that sort of changing the discussions around tuition and financial aid, or does that just seem sort of like this other thing sort of happening?
So I think about your circumstance, or what your perspective on this might be, but quickly mine is, I think what's happening at Cooper Union is an example of what's happening at higher ed just generally. I think schools are forced to look at the reality of their fiscal circumstance and go, what can we do? And Cooper Union is an example of this. The Olin School of Engineering is another example of this. Schools that had kind of these no tuition models, but how sustainable is that? What can we actually do? And so my take on Cooper Union is they're making some tough choices. They're coming from a great place. They're making some tough choices. At bottom, it's a phenomenal education. And wherever they're landing, I think it's still going to be an incredible value. I just hope that in that process for them, they don't lose that message of accessibility. I mean, that's free tuition. Hey, it doesn't get any more accessible than that, right? And so I think they've lost some of that. I wish them well with that. I don't know if you had anything.
No.
Great.
Thank you guys so much
Yeah.
for being with us.
Thanks.
Paul, especially you.
Thanks.
Paul is zipping off to New York, so drive
Yeah,
safely on your
yeah,
way.
thanks.
Ann, you ready?
Go Ann.
Thanks a lot.
Hi, everybody.
Thanks, Ginny.
Really great to be here.
So
Especially-
I have to say that when I saw Ginny and Paul having trouble with the clickers, I thought Ann was breaking out in a sweat back there because last year, poor Ann, when she did this, the clickers were a problem. So I think you took them out of your
I took them
presentation.
out.
You took them out.
I don't like the stress. Being in front of a
strategy.
group is stressful enough. So they're not in. Although, interestingly, I'm usually a very early person. You saw me come in at 7:01. I was over in 41 Haldeman at 6:30, just getting there early, getting my notes together, getting my thoughts together, being calm and relaxed, because that's what was on my calendar. And then I kind of look up and I'm thinking, boy, I know some people are later than I am, but this is getting a little funny. Then I started to try and figure out where I was supposed to be, couldn't find it. Emailed anybody who was on my email list that I knew was here tonight, just said, please advise, I'm not sure where I'm supposed to be. So thankfully, Rahel sent me the note, and I got here 7:01, not too bad. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to follow Paul and Ginny to sort of tee up philanthropy in the Dartmouth budget, because one of the things that we do so importantly is the money that we raise for scholarship and for financial aid and for current use giving, which also predominantly supports scholarship. I'm going to go pretty quickly so I can stay within my time frame, and Mike knows that I often go over, and Rick knows that, so they'll cut me off. We'll do a quick, really brief introduction of advancement. So advancement at Dartmouth is alumni relations and development. We'll talk about philanthropy in the broader context of the United States very quickly so that then we can go into the role of philanthropy at Dartmouth. And we'll talk just a touch on campaign planning. And then if there's time, I'll just show you some fun gifts, which are just kind of fun to look at. We have a mission statement for advancement, and we engage alumni and other constituencies in the life of the institution, maximize support for Dartmouth's priorities, promote the work of faculty, students, and alumni to fulfill Dartmouth's mission and to build its reputation as one of the premier academic institutions in the world. We're predominantly focused on alumni. Say other constituents, we have parents. I see Michael here in the room. He helps work with our parent constituencies, and we have others, but it's predominantly alumni. This is just quickly who we are. We have a senior vice president, Bob Lasher, myself as chief operating officer, a vice president for alumni relations, a vice president for development, and sort of new in our set is a vice president for principal giving and presidential initiatives, or presidential initiatives and principal giving. Those are some of our largest gifts to Dartmouth. Yep.
Can you tell me the difference between advancement and development?
Development is part of advancement. Advancement is sort of an umbrella word for all of the work that we do to advance Dartmouth. It has alumni relations as part of it, the work that we do to engage alumni and work with classes and clubs, regional programming around the country, and then it has development, which is the fundraising arm of what we do. It's the overall. This is just a functional activity org chart of what we do. It's pretty broad. So, you know, to your question about what is advancement and advancing, a lot of work in alumni relations, classes, clubs, affiliated groups, shared interest groups, all the ways that alumni might organize themselves or be interested in getting to know each other in different ways, regionally or through different affiliations. Continuing education and travel development, big line there of all the different activities that we do in a fundraising world. We work with a lot of volunteers. We work with an advancement committee on the Board of Trustees, President's Leadership Council, boards of overseers and visitors. We partner with program directors like the Dickey Center, the Tucker Foundation, the Hopkins Center, the Hood Museum to work with their boards of overseers and those volunteers who are very often predominantly alumni as well. And then as a chief operating officer, I'm sort of a strategic partner, but then I have a functional group of sort of shared services and operations. Mm-hmm.
Alicia, it's Teacher Reserve.
Hi, Alicia. It's great to see you. We were just on email today.
Can you just explain what a board of overseers is? It's just a term I haven't heard before.
Sure. So the Hopkins Center for the Performing Arts at Dartmouth has a board of overseers. It's about 20 for the Hop. It's about 18 alumni and a couple of parents. And they're from throughout the generations and throughout the country and the world. And they help provide sort of ambassadorial work, advisory work. They're not a fiduciary board. They're not like the Board of Trustees. So they're really more relationship and support work with the director of the Hop in that case. So quickly, with whom do we work? Go through this quickly. Office of the President, Provost, Dean of the College, Finance and Investment, Deans of the Tuck School, Thayer, Geisel, and the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. Board of Trustees, President's Leadership Council. That's sort of quick snapshot of everything. So that's the quick overview. Rick?
An observation about boards of overseers and boards of visitors. They're really useful ways to get a lot of outside or other input into activities. They're a great way to engage potential donors and sort of keep alumni engaged in the activities of Dartmouth. But it also creates the opportunity for confusion around some kind of fiduciary or oversight role. And it's been interesting. You sort of walk a delicate line between engagement and they think they run the place. And, you know, we think they're there to be engaged and interested and then give us a lot of money, and they think they're there to run the place. And that's created an interesting dynamic sometimes.
Yeah, from time to time we ask them for their advice, and from time to time they want to give it, it turns out. So, but they really are terrific. They're an asset. So that was advancement at Dartmouth. I'll quickly do an overview of philanthropy. So I'm not using the clickers, so you can just call this out. The, the question is, what percent of personal disposable income was given to charity, U.S. disposable income last year, actually 2 years ago, which is the last full year we have data for at the moment? Anybody can call out. Well done. Nice. I don't, I'm sorry, I know. And I'm usually the tchotchke crowd. Advancement gives things away all the time. Last year, 2013, a little bit, about $350 billion given away to charity. It tends to track, and Paul and Ginny focused on this in terms of scholarship need. Philanthropy tracks along the market as well. So we used as our index and our proxy for that the S&P 500. The dotted line is S&P 500, and the yellow line is total giving in 2013 dollars. So you can see where there have been recessions up and down, but it tends to follow that along. So this is, of all that giving, $350 billion to charity. How much went to education? Anybody? I'm not using a clicker. $52 billion. Education is the second largest philanthropic cause, second to religion. So trends in philanthropy. This is sort of US trends in philanthropy. I use one image to demonstrate trends in philanthropy. This is Mark Zuckerberg. I think he just turned 31 or something like that. So the first trend is younger donors, younger mega donors. Mark and his wife, Priscilla Chan, together gave the single largest gift ever to date of $1 billion, Facebook stock worth about $1 billion. And they gave it to the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. So that's the second trend. They're very interested in flexibility. And when you give through something like a community foundation, instead of giving to Harvard as he could have, you have a lot of flexibility in how you make that gift. That's something called a donor advised fund. We have those at Dartmouth, and it allows the philanthropic donor to sort of think through and be strategic about how they want to give. Another trend that Mark and his wife Priscilla represent is very focused cause-based giving. So last year they gave $40 million to cure Ebola, to help treat Ebola in Africa. So this is sort of the trends of the kinds of donors that we're working with. They're younger, they're more flexible, they're interested in causes, and they're different than what we've been used to over the past few decades. Changing demographics, cross-discipline giving, mission-driven philanthropy, accelerating customer demands of technology. Mark represents that as well. Donor advised funds, that's what the Silicon Valley is. It's sort of a philanthropic savings account, checking account that gets a charitable gift deduction right away, and you can kind of write your philanthropic gifts from that account. Continued focus on science of market research, modeling, analytics. We do a lot of that in advancement, a lot more than we used to 10 years ago, quite a bit. Large comprehensive campaigns. We came out of one in 2009. We're planning one right now. And alumni giving for education remains the primary source of private support. Strategies for donor acquisition, how we think about encouraging new donors are critical, and engagement is so important. And that's why we at Dartmouth are an integrated division of alumni relations and development. What we do in alumni relations over the course of all those years impacts our ability to raise money. So the top motivations for giving to higher education: belief in the cause, loyalty to the institution, high regard for the leaders, desire to make a difference, and commitment to giving back. And what people are often surprised, it's not tax deductions and recognition. It's really about the mission. And that's pretty much true for...
Earlier in this series, we discussed the idea of what is the value of higher education. Seems to me that a big constituency that we need to ask the question of is the people giving money. What do they perceive as the value? Rick, you thought about that?
We talk a lot about it.
We talk a lot about it. Many of our donors will say that their education, their Dartmouth education, transformed their lives. Can sum it up into that nugget. They're so grateful for that. They're grateful for what it afforded them. That's why so many of them give to scholarships, so that it can sort of pay that forward to others as well. So philanthropy at Dartmouth. I picked out every spring photo I could find. So that's Robert Frost, in case you didn't know. So the Alumni Fund, the Dartmouth College Fund, that's annual giving at Dartmouth. All your colleges have an annual giving fund. Was founded just over a century ago, 1913. Plays a significant role in the budget at Dartmouth. We'll talk a little bit more about that. That's why I'm here. Last year it raised $53.7 million, and 42.8% of the undergraduate alumni gave to it last year. The reason why it was founded, its purpose in 1913 was what we like to call, it was literally a burning platform. Dartmouth Hall burned down to the ground, and the call went out to alumni to raise it up as quickly as possible. And that was the start of fundraising at Dartmouth in that kind of a way. Our first capital campaign was launched by President John Sloan Dickey in 1957. That's about in higher education when campaigns really got going. So this is the Dartmouth College Fund, annual giving to Dartmouth, your alumni fund. What's the role that that plays in the Dartmouth budget, the annual operating budget? Raise it out, raise your hand, call it out. Anybody? 12%. If you'd said 10, I would have given it to you. In different years, it goes between 10 and 12. But in 2014, it was about 12%.
How does that compare to other institutions?
That's a little bit high. It's higher than a number of other institutions. As you know, our annual fund is a really critical part of Dartmouth's operating budget. Different people have described that in other ways. It allows us to fight above our weight class. If you think about what a $55 million annual fund translates to an endowment, it's what helps us operate at the level of some of our peers that have even larger endowments than we do. I will say, we talk about the Dartmouth College Fund as gifts of today, gifts of this current year. We talk about endowment income as gifts of the past. Donors from past years have made gifts to endowment, and through the talented work of the Endowment Investment Office, they've grown, and that contributes to 23% of the income. I think you've probably already heard from Pam Peden. 35%, we like to talk about it in advancement, comes from gifts of this year and gifts of the past. How many of you were here during the recession of 2008 and 9? So you remember the strategic budget reduction in investment. As part of getting out of that budget crisis, advancement took on one of the investment functions of that effort and agreed to raise our Dartmouth College Fund by 42% over 4 years. It was massive growth for Dartmouth. How much was given to Dartmouth last year for all purposes, cash? I'm just going to go then. $256 million in cash. That was a high watermark for Dartmouth. If you remember watching some of the news, we had a magnificent $100 million gift a year ago this month. So it was fantastic. It was very good for Dartmouth. We're having a good year this year, too. That gift was $100 million for the priorities of the president, an anonymous donor, anonymous family, and that donor's only restriction was that it be used for the academic enterprise at the behest of the president. Mm-hmm.
I'm confused. You gave a figure of $58 million in 2014.
That was the annual fund, $55 million, yep. So this is gifts for all purposes, gifts for buildings, endowments, scholarship funds, endowed scholarship funds. It includes Tuck, Thayer, Geisel giving to the entire institution for all purposes.
So that was, the 58 was just for the college?
It was just the alumni fund for the college. Sort of just like the philanthropic checkbook as opposed to the philanthropic endowment savings account.
So when we talk about the operating budget, the 58 million, 55 million, whatever it was,
Yep.
hits the operating budget in the year
In
it's
the year,
received.
right.
The $100 million gift doesn't hit the operating budget until it distributes from the endowment every year. So it's the gift that literally keeps on giving.
Right, right. So we have current use gifts, the annual fund. We receive those, we solicit those gifts, receive those gifts, and Dartmouth spends those gifts all in the year in which they're received. For endowment gifts, as Mike said, the income of that endowment is spent. This is just the results from last year. You can see that was our big April bump. So this is always, I think, interesting for people to understand. What % of giving to a place like Dartmouth comes from individuals as opposed to corporate and foundation gifts? It's 94. It's almost entirely individuals.
So I have a perfect, I'm Lisa Valdez.
Hi, Lisa.
Professor of Government.
Yes.
I have a perfect record
We've spoken
of
to
giving.
our staff. Thank you very much.
I have a perfect record of giving to my alma mater, but my contributions are outweighed by probably at least 1,000 times by other people in my class. Why does a place like Dartmouth care about my
That's a great question. I reported earlier that last year 42.8% of Dartmouth undergraduate alumni gave last year. We count that number very closely and are very keen on it. At Tuck, Dean Danos reports 70% of his alumni body giving every year. It's one of the numbers that Alicia will know gets counted in various metrics and rankings. So it's worked into the algorithm in terms of alumni support going forward in the years that are out. So we are we consider the $25, $50, $100, $200 gift as important as the larger gift, so that we can always be focused on that alumni participation number. It works into many algorithms, U.S. News and World Report rankings, etc.
So it's a good.
It is good and in and of itself, and it adds up to, pardon me? You're going to decrease it? It's okay. It adds up to a lot. When we have a number of gifts that really form the foundation of giving, it just provides that sort of foundational support for any fundraising that we're doing. So last year, 23,000 of 77,000 graduate and undergraduate alumni. That's exactly what we're counting. So this gets into a little bit of the Ivy Plus comparison. We're sort of middle of the pack when it comes to, maybe even bottom third of the pack when it comes to total gifts per student. If we take all of our giving, that $256 million, this is actually fiscal 11 through 13, so it wouldn't include last year's. All of that giving prorated over our students, we are at about $26,000-$27,000 per student. That's how we can kind of compare to other institutions that are larger or smaller than ours. And the percent of gifts, we're even lower than that in terms of our percent of total gifts, our growth rate. A little bit of that is a function of the years that we've chosen to snapshot here. We weren't in a campaign during that fiscal 11 to 13, so not only were we out of a recession, or partly still in a recession, but we weren't in a capital campaign, so our numbers are a little bit lower.
And do you know
Yep.
who else, what peer institutions were in a campaign? I mean, so are you assuming that if the percentages are higher, they were probably in a campaign?
They were in a campaign. Stanford very definitely, Yale definitely, Harvard is always sort of in a campaign, even though they only kind of launched, right, Rick? They were in the quiet phase of their campaign, so absolutely. Stanford for sure, and Yale absolutely. We're just finishing up campaigns, MIT. We also average across alumni, so we can compare by the size of our alumni body. And again, middle of the pack, bottom third of our giving per alumnus, but our percent of participation is second only to Princeton, and we're very focused on that. Just wanted to give a quick snapshot of one of the outcomes of having campaigns. It tends to lift total fundraising, and each time that you have a concerted effort, a campaign we call it, around giving to all purposes. So these are just sort of the levels that we've lifted to with each of the campaigns since 1967. Mm-hmm.
What's the idea behind the campaign? So you have the annual fund, and people give for all those reasons that the purpose, whatever, right? They feel close to the institution. So what's the idea behind campaign? Let's make an extra effort to get more money.
Yeah, it's a made-up construct to be perfectly frank. And if we were a private industry, a company, and we had a marketing campaign around the launch of a new product, sort of a made-up construct around giving us a motivation, a little bit of momentum, a reason to be talking a lot, we'll sort of package things around the language of a campaign. It's not by accident that that sort of comes from the old military language, a campaign, an effort. You really kind of launch and rally forces to do that. At institutions of higher education, it tends to come at a time of new leadership, transition in leadership, the new ideas that also need the funding of a campaign. So they come in parallel with each other. We have new ideas, new vision, lots of exciting things that need to happen that take money, and then a campaign to sort of bring all of that together, marshal the forces, marshal the energies, and lift that effort.
So you need to have some quieter periods in order to get more money at the more active ones?
Yeah, well, in higher education, we only graduate 1,000 new donors every year. So we have to sort of let a little bit of donor capacity sort of make gifts, make commitments, and then pay those commitments off a little bit, and then make commitments, and then sort of a younger group will come through to higher income opportunities. So we have a little bit of a forced pace of our donor acquisition and alumni relations and development. We can't go out and just sort of acquire lots of other donors. A little bit. Sometimes we'll get lucky in that way, but like I said, we graduate 1,000 new ones every year and hope they'll give.
But you could think that like you have 94% individual giving.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is campaign, like the campaign addresses those 94%, right? The individuals.
Yep.
So one could imagine that like during the quiet, like the non-campaign times, you could like invest in this, growing this 6%.
Yep, and we're always looking for ways to appeal to people that might not have found something interesting in the last, or to do that through an engagement opportunity. So if there have been periods of time where we haven't been where we've been weaker in engaging alumni of different affiliations, different interests, different regions, different parts of the world, we'll work on that in between campaigns as well. So I'm going to go a little bit quickly here. This is a little bit of reflection on the last campaign. It was $1.3 billion. This is where the money went, mostly to the academic enterprise, residential and campus life, financial aid, and the student experience.
Does academic enterprise there mean professorships?
Yep.
And things like that?
Yep, and it would also include Kemeny and Haldeman in that scenario. So the building, the building that I was in, that we're not in right now. Moore actually was a different donor. Just a little bit of a breakdown of where those gifts went. $531 million of it was current use, money that was spent as soon as we get it. That campaign, $345 million was for various facilities that were built during that decade, and $407 million went to endowment in that campaign. Endowments of all kinds, professorships, scholarship endowments, curricular development funds in faculty departments, coaching endowments, things like that. This is just sort of a laundry list of some of the endowment opportunities that we accomplished in the last campaign. $110 million to Paul and Ginny's point, $110 million to endowed scholarship financial aid. It was a big facilities decade for Dartmouth. These are many of the facilities that were built. So we'll talk a little bit about endowment, gifts of the past. So we developed this slide to sort of demonstrate the impact of additional giving to endowment. So if we call a point in time of 1990, the market value of our endowment at that time, the investment office, in doing the great work that it has done, grows in that blue block. By adding gifts through various campaigns and fundraising, and then allowing the investment office to help grow that through compounding, that's what's added by the green. So you can see that the additional gifts over that entire period adds $1.8 billion of market value, including the return on those gifts. It's the gift principal plus the investment results.
So the other thing to point out on this slide is thinking about what would have happened if we'd taken, beginning in 1990, half of every year's Dartmouth College Fund and put it in the endowment instead of spending it as current use. And that's the constant tension as philanthropy comes in. Do we spend it today for a great new program, or do we put it in endowment and sort of fuel the future? And it's always a struggle to make that balance.
What would happen if, instead of spending unrestricted bequests, for example, we put them in endowment? And at different periods of time, our fiscal decisions have been different on those moments, depending on the needs of the day of the institution. This gets a little bit to some of those tensions that Rick just mentioned. So it's a light slide, I hope you can see it. The green line is current use giving over time, money that's solicited, received, and spent. Could be also, the Dartmouth College Fund, could be Friends of the Dickey Center. The blue line, gifts to endowment, and the red line, gifts to plant. So this point right here, 2009, is the end of the last campaign, and coincidentally also the start of the recession. So at that time, our efforts in endowment fundraising went down, and because of our needs for current use money to kind of close the gap for the budget at Dartmouth over that time, our efforts, as I mentioned, for the Dartmouth College Fund went up. This has longer term implications that Mike and Rick think about all the time. If this tremendous effort is going into current use money that we're spending right now, it's not being added to the endowment right now, and therefore there is less additional green happening in this moment in time. And so as we think about our fundraising philosophy and plans and strategies for the coming years, we're in constant conversation with Mike and Rick to make sure that our fundraising strategies are in concert with our fiscal plans for the institution and the financial needs of the college.
And the other thing I would highlight is there are also conversations with donors that relate to timing. I mean, if you're at end of life and you're giving money, you might want to see your money used. So there's actually a lot of pressure from the donor. Go spend it now because I want to see impact in my lifetime.
Yep.
And if you're Mark Zuckerberg, you might want to see impact now because you're impatient. Finding donors that are interested in having money go in endowment and yield 5% return and build over time, that's a different kind of donor.
Yep, yep.
The ballpark break-even time frame is about 7 or 8 years, depending on lots of assumptions about return and how much you spend, where if you put in $1 million and spend it versus put it in the endowment and count on the distribution to grow to that $1 million, the break-even is 7 or 8 years.
So I'm going to go really fast. We're bottom third, middle of the, just below the middle of the pack for our endowment dollars per student over time.
Remember this
and
number
remember
if you're
this
thinking about getting a presidency at a college.
Our last campaign about the $400 million into endowment, so our endowment per student is a bit lower, and our growth rate over that time is at the lowest. That's what's of greatest concern to our team in philanthropy and to Rick and to Mike as we think about growth of endowment.
And that's also where you can see the impact. You can sort of compare us to MIT if you take into account the current use spending of Dartmouth College Fund, which is about as much money as you might spend off on an extra $1 billion of endowment.
That's exactly right. Yep.
So in the near term, you're hitting above your weight, but your sacrifice, you haven't built your farm team. You're competing for the championship that year.
Compare that to Princeton, which is fully endowed for scholarship and financial aid. So they don't use any of their current operating budget or current needs to fund their financial aid budget. Therefore, all of their current use giving goes to other needs of the institution, and their endowment fundraising goes towards other needs as well. So earlier donors fully funded the financial aid need at Princeton.
Remember that slide that Paul showed where it had how much was coming from restricted versus unrestricted? Right. That red bar, the unrestricted, is over $40 million that's being spent from the rest of the operating budget that's not coming from the endowment.
It's not coming from the endowment. His time period was also a function of post-campaign, so hopefully we'll be able to bring that up a little bit, but it's on our minds all the time.
Plus, it just seems inefficient. I mean, to be so reliant on annual, you've got to go back and get it every single year.
and
It is.
the cost and the resources and the mailing, it just.
It's a churn.
Yeah.
Yep, it's a churn. $55 million though, if you think about that as 5% of an endowment draw, that's, another $1 billion. But it's true, it's expensive. Mike knows exactly what our budget is to raise that money. So quickly on campaign planning, because we are planning a next one. This was another nice spring outdoor classes. This can happen. The decisions that we're making now, what are our dollar and percent goals for a campaign? We do a lot of detailed analytical assessments. We scour data, we think about our capacity, we use internal data, external data, and really think about our capacity to raise money. We think about a timeline. Campaigns tend to be the classic campaign, about 5 years of a public period, usually 2 years of a quiet time leading up to that. We like to launch with 40 to 50% of the money already having been committed. Thinking about funding objectives all the time. Rick and the provost and the president and the deans, thinking about the things that we would want to raise money for. What are our strategies and our ideals? What are the visions of President Hanlon and Provost Dever? The themes and identity, how does that fit within Dartmouth's consideration of its identity in the next decade? Our engagement plans, what we're doing already to engage alumni, parents, and friends of the college to start to get them ready for this truly artificial construct of a campaign, but to start to build that energy. And what are the budget needs of the institution? We think about and meet with Maria Lascaris and Ginny Hazen and Paul Sunday about what does their trendline budget need look like? What will that turn out to be for a scholarship priority for us in a campaign? So this is just to quickly talk about how much it costs to raise a campaign. This is kind of a preliminary data point. How long does it take to raise a major gift? Let's call a major gift $250,000. Someone who's giving $50,000 a year to Dartmouth over 5 years. They usually do it in a pledge. See, it takes 2 years for that conversation to happen. So a lot of the staff that we have are focused on having those conversations. If they're starting those conversations now, and we're paying a staff member to do that, we won't have the gift committed for 2 years on average. That means it's a little bit more expensive at the beginning of a campaign than the end of a campaign, because we're starting to have conversations that will have a return on investment later on. Yeah. Why does it take this long? They're thinking about of the many needs at Dartmouth. It's kind of a matchmaking conversation. We're talking with an alumnus, and we're saying, these are the priorities of Dartmouth at this time. Let's talk about where your greatest interest is and where you might feel compelled to make Dartmouth one of your highest philanthropic priorities. And so we're talking about decal, and we're talking about a professorship, and we're talking about a scholarship, and trying to have that relationship that says, that's it, that's what's going to inspire me to make that big a gift.
Is that after you identify?
Well, if we think about how long we've known them, we've known them since Paul Sunday was introduced to them at the age of 17. And if their mom or dad went to Dartmouth, we've known them since before then. So that might be from the time that we have a gift officer have a conversation with them. But we've been hopefully doing a great job. All of you have hopefully been doing a great job in building that relationship already from the moment they apply to Dartmouth to when they graduate and begin to think about giving. But that's from the time that we're having a gift conversation. This is just to be clear on what it costs to raise. So this is on average, a low of 11.9 cents on the dollar to raise a campaign. At the beginning of a campaign, it can be as high as 16%, 16 cents on the dollar. That gets to that 24-month lag of fundraising. A lot of time right now with presidential travel and provostial travel, and the deans are out on the road meeting tons of people. This was just last year. They're out everywhere, they're talking. They're having those conversations of priorities. They're having big events and small events and meetings and really starting to get people excited about the presidential and provostial and dean's visions going forward. And then a campaign does other things than raise money as well. It can affirm institutional values. This is a time when, as an advancement office, we're out talking about the vision and the values of the institution. We're we're kind of marketing that vision for timeless aspirations, and we're really providing the funds for objectives that will help define the next quarter century. So it's more than just the money. It's really affirming what President Hanlon and Provost Dever and the deans all want to do for Dartmouth. So I promised I would stop, and I will only do the next one if you want to call me back at the end.
Say that again?
I've got gift stories, but
Oh,
it's
you have,
already
you have
40.
a few. Ingrid, you okay? Go ahead,
Are
Anne,
you
with a
good?
couple of stories, for sure.
Inga's been working like crazy. She started the day with our advancement staff, and she ended last night with students talking about their life as alumni. So we couldn't be more good. So I don't want to take time from you. All right. Any questions before we go on? I'm going to give you just some fun gift stories. This is our oldest endowment fund at Dartmouth. The John Phillips 1777 professorships started with 37 pounds, 10 shillings, and 25 bushels of wheat. This funds a professorship in religion. Nancy Frankenberry is the holder of this professorship in religion. Our largest endowment fund is the Edward Tuck 1862 Fund for Dartmouth. It's actually a fund for Dartmouth, not for Tuck, even though he's the donor. It distributes $6 million a year, created with 1,700 preferred shares of Great Northern Railway. This is one of our funniest ones. When the trumpeters play at commencement, it's an endowed fund. This is one we try to avoid. We would never want to get in this relationship again, or this arrangement again. Funded by a bequest, and the stipulation by the donor was that principals reinvested, and for a period of 100 years, and then it can be spent. Its current market value is $940,000. We can't spend it for quite some time.
I wonder about
We try not to do this. We work very hard to avoid that. We want to spend donor money.
Is it a tension between, setting up an opportunity that excites the donor and is going to provoke them to give, versus creating a situation that adds a lot of administrative burden to administering that for the next however many 100 years?
Yeah. Our mission is to raise money for the priorities set forth by the administration of Dartmouth College. So we try very hard, while meeting those donor interests, to focus only on the priorities of the institution. We have turned away gifts. We have avoided stipulations. We don't always get it perfectly. We've been much better at it for the last 10 years than in the previous 10 years, so there aren't too many things like this. For bequests, it's a little funky. The gift comes after the donor's dead, so sometimes we don't always know, but we try very hard to have conversations about wills and things like that even before then. But I think that tension can be very hard, and it can be uncomfortable for faculty and deans and administrators as well, because you don't want the donor to wag the dog.
And it's not just the administrative burden. I mean, I think gifts allow us to do so many incredible things, but imagine somebody says, I'll give you $25 million to fund 10 new professorships in biochemistry. That's great. But a professorship spends off about a little over $100,000 a year. That's not what it costs to have a professor in that professorship. They also need lab space, they'll need startup funding. So you can have gifts that sort of suck you down a hole that require other. Now, if it's where you wanted to go anyway and you had money, it's hugely helpful. But if it's not where you'd intended to go, sometimes it draws you off. And not here, but I've certainly seen situations where a president, a dean in a campaign gets a donor who's interested in something that they'd never thought about before, but suddenly it becomes a priority of the school people want to raise money and want to do things, and it's hard not to be tempted by that money, but
Yeah.
it can cost.
Yeah, it absolutely can. Did you know we owned the top of Mount Washington for a while? And the Cog Railway? If you haven't done this yet, the Cog Railway is the coolest thing to go on Mount Washington. But this was Henry Teague, class of 1900. He fell on financial hard times. Dartmouth loaned him a little bit of money. He paid it back, and then he gave him the railway and the top of the mountain.
Don't be coming to us for a loan. Think about it.
Yeah, that was 1910. We were a kinder, gentler world.
Do we own it now?
We don't. We sold it in 2008. It's a very hard place to be a landlord. Leon Williams gave us 91,000 acres and 2,600 heads of cattle. This funded 3 professorships. We sold it in 2 years. Frank Guarini, this is a current alumnus. a charitable remainder trust. He funded off-campus programs, and his name currently is in the Foreign Studies program for a very generous charitable lead trust, a gift that starts while he's alive and completes when he passes away. It's a very generous gift. Florence Bennett Moore, a widow of a member of the class of 37. This is one of our largest bequests to date. Her husband only attended Dartmouth for 1 year. It was a Depression time, and he left, and he never forgot. They never missed a reunion. And after he passed away, she made a gift that named Moore, the building we're in, Moore Theater at the Hopkins Center, all sorts of fun stuff. Most students today don't know what the Yellow Pages are, but they built our library. John Barry founded the company that created the Yellow Pages and gave wonderful gifts to Dartmouth. We have great gifts that come from faculty innovation and startup companies, and Glycofy is one of them with Tillman Jerngras and Charles Hutchinson, former dean of Thayer. I always like this picture. It's not what you expect when you see the Geisels, but that's Audrey and Theodore Geisel, Dr. Seuss. And theirs is a gift that gives forever, including some royalties on any movie that you see now. So when you're watching the Lorax, it's still coming to Dartmouth. And then last weekend, 77 women came to Dartmouth. They're among the 114 of the Centennial Circle, who, in honor of the 100th anniversary of the Dartmouth College Fund, promised each to give $100,000 or more to Dartmouth. 114 women did this. This is a new era of giving at Dartmouth, and this was tremendous. It raised almost $15 million that year, and it continues to give.
And Bob mentioned that a bunch of these women weren't even on the development radar.
No, this was very much an alumni, A-L-U-M-N-A-E, the women, driven effort, and they solicited each other and helped rally that cause around each other through new levels of giving. This was very exciting for Dartmouth and the envy of our peer institutions. So that's it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ann. As Inga gets ready for our transition, one direct link I want to make back to our first session. You guys may remember, first of all, Ann, we showed the video from advancement of the Why Would You Ever Give to Dartmouth? I don't know if you knew that we showed that video. But we also had a slide, you'll remember, that showed the average cost per undergraduate student of about $113,000. And we talked about how tuition, mandatory fees, and room and board covered about $62,000 of that. Ann just told you about where most of the rest of that comes from. The Dartmouth College Fund and the earnings on the endowment, on unrestricted endowments, are what pay for most of the rest of that delta. So that's the link that was really important to make back from today, back to that first session. Inga, take it away.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me. It's really nice to be here, and look forward to talking to you about one of the things I love most in the world is student affairs and how we do it here at Dartmouth. And one of the things I always want to start out with is student affairs has totally changed in the 25 years that I've been doing this, 30 years really. Don't want to say that, it sounds really, but there's a lot more to it now than there was. I'll talk more about that now. And there's a huge expectation, as you would probably understand, since people are paying an extraordinary amount of money to go to colleges like Dartmouth. And the expectation level on the part of the student, the parent, and many other people is very high. And in student affairs, we try to figure out how we're going to serve all those different constituencies at the same time. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that as we go along. So the goals in our division, what we're trying to do is provide for every student. That's really important. So every student that wants to walk into the Academic Skills Center and get a study group or a tutor, we want to be able to make that happen as best we can. Every student that walks into Student Accessibility Services, of the hundreds of students that use that, we want to be able to serve that student. Every student goes into the dining hall 3 times a day or some of the dining halls and has to have a good experience, a good meal. Dick's House, I mean, I could go on and on. So it's very important for us to provide a effective and efficient experience for all of our students. That's really, you should know that funding requests come to me all day long from all kinds of people. Students, parents, faculty members, everybody's got the best idea in the world. If they just show me the budget and if I could just fund it. So I do spend a lot of time, unfortunately, having to say no. So I go back to this chart a lot and try to figure out. I forgot to introduce my colleague, Steve LeBlanc. He is our head of finances. If any questions get really complicated, he's going to be here to save me and answer them. And he does wonderful work, wonderful analysts. He really helps me figure out how to make the most of our money and to try to fund as much as we can of all the different requests we get. I just wanted to show you what encompasses the Dean of the College area. Health services, academic support services and campus life, safety and security, and then a lot of people don't know, the Morton Farm, Skiway, Dartmouth Dining, undergraduate residential operations, and then the health plan for Dartmouth students and the Student Activities Fund. I just want to tell you how funny it is that the Skiway reports to me. I grew up in LA. I've never skied. I'm not really an outdoor winter person, and I just think it's great. So at home in my house, I have a big Skiway sign because it just cracks me up, and I love it. I spend most of my time at the Skiway in the fall, summer, and spring hiking, but not in the winter. So it's just, one of these days I'll get out there. Okay, hold on, let me just get to my sheet here. All right, now I have to start reading. So this is a slide that you've seen before, as you know. We want to be sure you understand the Student Affairs Division finances in the larger context. On the left, we've highlighted the Dean of the College line for comparison purposes. Student Affairs is 6.1% of the institution's total budget. Our rate of increase over time as reflected in the last column of the chart on the left is 2.1%, well below the institutional average and the third lowest of all divisions represented. The $34.2 million total budget includes subvention, gifts and endowments, reserves, the Dartmouth health plan, and student activity funded items. On the right, the chart reflects centrality funded expenses, i.e. college subvention, not including gifts and endowments, etc. Student Affairs receives $16.1 million in central funding, or 4.2% of the college subvention total. Student Affairs has had the lowest increase in centrally funded expenses over time at 0.8%. And I emphasize that because, frankly, we take a lot of hits in Student Affairs about sometimes administrative bloat and spending a lot of money and so, and that's how I hear all that. But that's not actually the case, and so I wanted to make the point of where we fit into the larger system. We just looked at the institutional context of FY16. Our FY16 divisional subvention budget of $16.1 million looks like this. Elements include staff compensation, student compensation. A lot of students work for us in our enterprises, in our offices. We couldn't do it otherwise. DDS, safety and security, academic skills center, all of it. And then the third component is non-compensation expenses.
What's the revenue?
Sorry.
Sorry, can you just say what the revenue is?
Steve?
Sure.
What's the revenue?
So this actually, it is excluding the auxiliaries.
Right.
So kind of the largest revenue producers obviously are dining and res life for us. But what's included here, the biggest items in that revenue line is the pharmacy revenue, because pharmacy is not considered an auxiliary for the college. And also we receive money from the professional schools for their use of Dick's House, so that's a big item. And also safety and security charges out fees to internal departments across the college. So there's actually a decent amount of that revenue is really money coming from other departments within the college.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, and I forgot to say this didn't include the auxiliaries, sorry, even though you guys told me to say that a million times.
Yeah, and so, not to jump in, but, so for the student comm dining is easily our largest employer of students, and so, I don't remember off the top of my head, you know, how much they spend, but that represents kind of the rest of our students.
We couldn't run dining services without our student workers. They're phenomenal. We couldn't do reunions. We couldn't do half the stuff we do out of dining services without our students. I just wanted to break down functions. People are always asking me what we do. These are our areas. These are the areas that they mainly break down: health, service, and wellness, student academic support services, campus life, divisional support, and then, of course, auxiliaries. We don't make anything. We don't make widgets. We don't make any of that stuff. We are a direct service department. We're constantly providing direct services to students, their parents, sometimes alums, but primarily students and their families. All kinds, as you can see here, of services. The Dean of the College expense distribution goes this way. The areas that I just talked about, you can see the percentages, and you can obviously see that the largest percentage is health, service, and wellness. Health care in higher education has changed so dramatically, I can't emphasize it enough. So when I went to college at a small liberal arts college, they had a half-time nurse. She came in 10 hours a week, and you could sometimes see her or you couldn't. And that was it. And there was no obligation to do anything else. And things have completely changed. When our students and our graduate students walk into Dick's House, they expect service on all kinds of health issues. And they don't, and rightly so. And they don't just expect, you know, oh, well, let me refer you to this place here, or they want service then. And usually, if they're really sick or they usually need service right at that moment, 24 hours a day. So just want to emphasize that. Yep. Alicia?
Yes. Are we one of the few Ivies that still have an infirmary? Is it us and Princeton? Or?
Yes, and thank you for raising that question, because often people say to me 3 or 4 times a day, we have this fantastic hospital. It is a fantastic hospital. Why don't we just use it? Well, honestly, every time we send a student over there, it's a full bed. The beds are full. We sometimes are in the hallway in the emergency room. There's nothing wrong with that, but there's no way I can send the 50 students a weekend that go to Dick's House to DHMC. So that's one of the reasons. That doesn't mean we couldn't maybe open up a student wellness, student health center there, but there'd have to be significant changes in the way they do their operations. And yes, we are one of the only ones left, but things are moving in the other direction now, and Princeton is just about to open up a brand new facility because the working with the city hospital has not worked out at all. And it's something we talk about all the time. Okay, Dean of the College funding sources, college subvention, which I'm going to let Steve explain what college subvention is, because he just does it so much better than I do.
Well, from our perspective, put simply, it's money that is provided centrally. And so it's...
by Rick.
Yes, by Rick. So it's...
Grudgingly.
So, I mean, you've seen the operating statement, I imagine, in it, some form of an operating statement in an earlier class, I believe. And so you see that there are sources of revenue that come in, tuition and the Dartmouth College Fund. And the institution makes decisions about where to use these central funds. And some of that decision making is kind of headed our way, and it pays for 58.8% 8% of our budget.
Thank you, Steve. Interdepartmental transfers, just so you know, sometimes the dean of the faculty and I will partner in something together, and they'll transfer some money our way. Sometimes one of the centers will co-sponsor something with us. If we're lucky, we'll get some of the president's money sometimes, and that's what interdepartmental transfers represent. Okay, clickers out. Here we go. Just wanted to give you a sense of some of the work that we do. During FY14, how many enrolled college students made use of counseling services? Am I doing this right? No, obviously I'm not. Yeah. Thank you, Rick. I'm pressing it. Okay, so guess. It is E. Thank you. Sorry. Now it's D, right? Yeah. Gosh, sorry. You guys, I can't even tell you how long this day's been, but that's all right. It's D. But I want to explain how this works. Now, Dartmouth has a really exceptional health plan. I have to say it's one of the best I've ever seen in higher education. And so we'll do 6 sessions with our counselors and then refer out. Usually, though, frankly, students are not that comfortable to go refer out, and we don't have as many doctors that can take their insurance as we need to, so they often stay in and use our counseling services. And we have some of the most amazing counselors that really put in amazing hours. And this is one of the things in higher ed that has changed dramatically in the 25 years. And that's just not us. This was happening when I was at Harvard. This was happening when I was at Beloit, too. Life is complicated. People are on all kinds of new medications. Things are different. And you really need to have an active, progressive, innovative, state-of-the-art counseling service for your undergraduate and graduate populations. Now, people can argue with me and say, no, you don't. But I think you do, because I'm not sure we could handle that. And let me tell you something. In the 10-week term, it changes all the game. Because with the institution I was at before, you have 21 weeks in a term. So if somebody gets sick or breaks their ankle or whatever, you can step out for a while, and then you can go back into your class. It's very hard to do that here, even for the best students. You had a question?
Is that undergraduate or undergraduate?
That's undergraduate and graduate. Thank you. Good question. All right, during FY14, how many student visits were there to the undergraduate deans in the Ross Advising Suite? Clicker. It's D, 6,280. I don't think people realize, a lot of people have a kind of old view of the role that their undergraduate dean played when they were in college. These days in higher education, in every school, students start here, and it's a lot of zigzagging in the path. And some students go off the path for a while, some students go on the path, and you need to have resources there to help students navigate, especially in a 10-week term. And so students are in and out of the undergraduate dean's offices all the time, not just students that are in trouble. Actually, we don't see as many students that are in trouble anymore. We see students now for all kinds of range of advising issues. And we start communicating with the incoming class as soon as Paul and his colleagues accept that class. All right, how many undergraduate housing, I know this one already, so I don't even have to. How many undergraduate housing assignments does the housing office make every year? D, 16,000. I've never seen people move so much as they move here. It is unbelievable to me. I did not believe the staff when I got here, but it's true. So we have a strong first-year program where students stay for 3 terms, but then we've kind of set up a system, we've set up a system where students move based on where the space is, and is it close to the gym, is it close to this, is it close to that? And we do 16,000 new assignments each year. That's not why we're moving to a housing system, but it tells you a lot about why we need to. Because frankly, when you are moving that much, you are just doing your laundry and sleeping. You don't really know who your neighbors are. You're not really invested in what's going on in your residence hall unless you're in a Greek house or maybe an affinity house or East Wheelock. And I just think we need to start changing that experience for all our students. How many students have participated in DBI programs over the last 2 years? DBI is our new intervention program to help with high-risk behavior. D, thank you. Thank you, Steve. It's D. So the reason I put this slide up is not only do we do the regular services that we do, but there are new initiatives every year. And that there should be. It's very important. People have new ideas. There's new best practices, new ways to do things. DBI is one of the best things I think that Dartmouth has done in the last few years, because basically at 1 or 2 or 3 in the morning at a party, I'm not going to be there, the CD's not going to be there, the UGA's not going to be there, but another student is going to be there. And when you see as many cases as I've seen of student conduct over the 30 years, there's usually a time in a student conduct situation, especially in a sexual assault or other kinds of things, where if someone had intervened at one point or gotten the person out of the situation, then bad things would not have happened. And so we're doing a bystander intervention program, and we've already trained over 2,000 students, so it's really exciting. Our goal is to have every Dartmouth student DBI trained at some point. Is this the next slide? Yes. There's no more questions? Good. Okay. What other factors affect student affairs work and resource allocation? So I talked to you about the 5.2%. So Dartmouth enrollment, as you saw on the other slides from the other speakers, has grown. And that has a particular impact for us. Every Dartmouth student has to have health services, academic services if they need them, student accessibility services, safety and security, access to Dick's house, a clean room, a meal, and on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And so as the enrollment number goes up, that has a big impact on us. New initiatives like DBI, which is very important and we're really supportive of it. Big new initiative we're working on right now is MDF. And we have, I think there's 11 things in MDF that we are responsible to get going and get moving for the fall. And then compliance has completely changed the nature of higher education. So compliance issues are important and it's good we have them, but they're also usually very demanding, high-touch things that we need to do, and sometimes compliance can be confusing from the government. Right now, the government's saying one thing about Clery and the other thing about sexual assault prevention, and we have to decide all the time, are we compliant, are we not compliant? And in order to receive federal funds, we have to be in full compliance. So, and that list of things that we need to be compliant around has grown dramatically in the last few years. Well, the last 20 years. And then risk management. That's changed everything, right? So insurance, throwing parties, all the things that undergraduates do, understandably, because they're young and want to have fun and do stuff, come with a level of risk. And then the other big risk cost is study abroad. So it's great. I think study abroad is fantastic and I love it and I'm always encouraging it. But if a student gets sick in China, we have to have, and we do, we're very fortunate here at Dartmouth to have excellent insurance on that, to be able, if he or she can't get the service there or needs to come home, to get that student and bring them home. So these are the things that factor into our budget. Questions and discussion?
So We have a few minutes. Questions for Inga, question for Ann. No multiple choice for Inga, though.
Yeah. God. Yes.
Sorry, this may sound a little hostile.
It's, that is my world.
A new policy was instituted this year at Nick's house where there was a copay on prescriptions, and that was new.
Yes.
Just trying to do numbers on the back envelope, it seems like you probably, what, $150,000 that brings you? Is that worth the nickel and dime to the students or the appearance of it?
So that's a great question. So our pharmacy right now is losing money. And so in order to even that out a little, we did that. Our health, I know it doesn't always seem this way, and I'm having this conversation with students and their parents all the time. Our health plan that we offer is a very generous health plan that covers, frankly, a lot of things that are not covered by other schools. And I'm very proud that we do that. But each year we have to sit down with these guys and understandably and talk about, are there areas where we can either generate a little revenue to deal with the cost of something else, or are there areas where we can save costs? And that's one of the things we've decided to do. Now, the pharmacy is doing much better than it had been doing, but it's still a very costly enterprise. I'm glad we have our own pharmacy because basically, well, CVS isn't open 24 hours a day. There's no good rapid transit to Walgreens or any of the 24-hour services, and there's no place that delivers here. So, whereas Boston and all the cities have all that. So, I think we need to have the pharmacy service, but you're right. These are choices where I feel like I'm making those kind of choices all the time. And it's a really good point. Yes? Yeah?
Oh, well,
Yes.
I'm excited about FICEP and some of the
Yep.
things that you introduced to help students develop the support-seeking behaviors to take advantage of the support that you guys provide. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you sort of evaluate the success of that program and
Sure.
what other programs like that you might be developing.
So FICEP, for those of you that don't know, is a first-year student enrichment program. We started it 5 years ago. It's just one of the best programs we have here. And it's to help first-generation students who are coming from schools that are not preparing them as well as other schools are preparing some of our students to be successful here. Not to just do okay here, to be successful here, to take advantage of research opportunities and study abroad and all of that. And so the way we evaluate it is we just graduated our first class. And in FICEP, you get invited. You don't have to do it if you don't want to. A lot of the research shows that if you force students into bridge programs, that doesn't go well. And so the students that chose to be in FICEP and the students that chose not to, the GPA of the students that chose to be in FICEP over the 4 years is significantly higher than the GPA of the students that didn't. And that's really what we use. Now, we also look at other things, how many research opportunities, internships, and all of that good stuff. But what we really want to make sure is that those students are being successful in the classroom. Okay, really nice to talk to you. Sorry
Inga,
about
thank
the
you.
clicker.
Thank you so much. Last year, one of the feedback items we got from the course last year was to introduce some more divisions and how they make decisions about their budget. And by far, the one that folks wanted to hear most from was from the dean of the college. And Inga was very willing to do that, and her team pulled together some great information. So thank you for doing that. Thanks again, everybody, for tonight. See you next Wednesday for our final session. Thank you.